Morning of the third day. Savant Ultramarine.
Part 3. Akane was in the dining room, so I tensed up. She sat alone at the round dining table with her legs crossed, the elegance of her pose almost un-Japanese, having her breakfast. Or no, she had already finished breakfast and was enjoying an after-meal coffee.
Oh, good morning.
It was the bright and lively voice of Akari in the midst of cleaning the dining room. No, wait, it wasn't her. Akari never greeted me bright and lively. That wasn't the Akari I knew, which meant... "Hi, Akari," I said, determining that it was her. Evidently, I was correct, as she grinned at me and bowed. Akari Chika and Hikari Chika. They were sisters. Twins. In fact, they were triplets, along with their silent younger sister Teriko. Teriko apparently had poor eyesight and was recognizable by her black-rimmed glasses. Akari and Hikari, however, were perfectly identical, from the length of their hair to their clothes, to the point that they weren't just similar, but the same. But unlike Akari, Hikari was incredibly approachable, generous, and good-natured. Even though I wasn't a true guest, she treated me like everyone else.
Breakfast? Wait one moment, please,
She said, then spun around and hustled off to the kitchen. She must be so good at spinning because she's small, I thought. With Hikari gone, I was suddenly left alone with Akane. After a square root of 2 seconds hesitation, I went ahead and took a seat near her. I thought to greet her, but she seemed completely immersed in thought, mumbling to herself in an inaudible voice, not even looking in my direction. It was as though she hadn't noticed me. What in the world was she thinking about? I pricked my ears to listen in.
Sente 9-6 pawn. Gote 8-4 pawn. Sente same pawn. Gote 8-7 pawn. Sente 8-4 rook. Gote 2-6 pawn. Sente 3-2 silver general. Gote 9-5 pawn. Sente 4-4 bishop. Gote 5-9 gold general. Back. Sente 2-7 knight.
Meaning unknown. She wasn't one of the 7 fools for nothing. Even the things they mutter to themselves are different, I thought, thoroughly impressed. But listening closely, it sounded like she was chronicling a match of shogi. Wow. Blind shogi. And by herself, no less. Is this what she always did in the morning?
Gote 2-3 pawn. Promote. Sente forfeits,
She said, and glanced over at me.
Ah, I was wondering. It was you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Isn't shogi tough? The pieces have a wider possibility of moves than in chess. I was playing Gote just now. It was a close victory.
Huh. You can go first into single-player shogi? Maybe Akane was able to partition her brain like a dolphin. Yeah, it seemed likely for someone like her.
Are you good at shogi or chess? Whichever?
She asked. I wouldn't say so. No.
Is that so?
Reading other people's minds isn't my forte.
No? I suppose not. You've got that kind of face.
She nodded.
I saw you from the window a little earlier. Out for a morning walk, were you?
Yes, a walk in the woods.
Ah, a walk in the woods. How nice. Very nice. The phytoncide released by the trees has a bactericidal effect and such.
What the hell? In Houston, Texas, in America, there's a research facility called the ER3 system. There, brilliant minds from around America, nay, around the world, gather, and it is referred to as the ultimate bastion of learning that delves into anything that could be called a field of study or research. From economics to history, political science to cultural studies, physics and higher mathematics to biochemistry, electrical and mechanical engineering, to parapsychology. It's also known as the Comprehensive Research Center. It was where those who loved learning and research above all else, you could say, crazies, assembled. A nest for the inhuman whose desire for knowledge exceeded even their natural biological desires. An entirely non-profit organization, they dared not sell their knowledge or research findings, and they were, in a sense, a closed and introverted clandestine organization. There were only 4 basic rules. Have no pride, have no principles, have no attachments, no whining. They were to unbegrudgingly cooperate with one another on all things under the sun to the fullest of their abilities, to never traffic in trifles even if the world should perish, and to never quit halfway even if the universe were to fail. The final destination for those who wanted to do research, who wanted to know, who had to know, with means and an end in complete harmony, it was the ER3 system. The people gathered there ranged from highly esteemed college professors to frontline researchers and amateur scholars, a truly principleless assembly of all manner of individuals. Their roster was so bizarre that the elements of the media ridiculed them as a cult of overeducated loonies. But their research had yielded great rewards. The demystification of Delevio's non-linear optics, the overwhelming advancement of volume hologram technology, and more recently, the establishment of the near-magical DOP as a sensory technology were all thanks to the ER3. Not the work of individuals, but rather team efforts, and non-profit work at that. They declined all awards and other various honors, and thus didn't draw much attention, but their reputation within the academic world was certainly high. It was a research center with a relatively brief history, not even a century old, but it was already globally networked. And within this research center existed a transcendent group known as the Seven Fools. 7 individuals that the selected as the 7 who were closest to the world's answers. They were truly geniuses among geniuses. One of them was Akane Soniyama. She had beautiful black hair, cut ruler precise to lend her an air of intellectualism. She was tall for a woman, with a stylishly slender build. There was no part of her that wasn't overflowing with a handsome femininity. She stood at the pinnacle of female Japanese academics. The ER3 system is relatively unknown in Japan. The fact that the ER3 itself is so exclusive is no doubt part of the reason for this, but the main reason is likely that the uncategorizable nature of the center doesn't fit with the Japanese way of doing things. Nevertheless, Akane was the first purely Japanese person, in her 20s no less, to rise to the ranks of the ER3 Seven Fools. She ought to have been a household name in her own country. Now, This may all beg the question of why a purely Japanese person like me knows so much about this. But there's no special reason, really. It's not that I'm particularly well informed. It's just that the ER3 and I have crossed paths a bit. You see, in preparation for the long term, ER3 system implements a study abroad program to educate the youth of the next generation. For 5 years, beginning with my second year of junior high school, I'd participated in that program. So naturally, I knew of Akane Soniyama's reputation as one of the 7 fools, and her above-the-clouds existence. That's why I was so surprised to discover her here on this island. I'm not at all the sweet type who surrenders unconditionally at the first sniff of authority or talent, but I couldn't help but be nervous. What exactly do you say to one of the 7 fools? I was sitting there, all clammed up, when Akane spoke again.
By the way, that blue-haired girl, Kunagisa, I mean?
Yes?
She's just lovely. Last night I had her do some maintenance on my PC. She's incredibly skilled, isn't she? We have techies at ER3 as well, but I've never seen one with such mechanical precision. She made it look like routine work. This may sound rude, but for a moment I wondered if she was really human. No wonder Iria absolutely adores her.
Really? I hope she wasn't a bother or anything. Akane let out a chuckle.
You sound like an escort vehicle.
An escort vehicle? That was some unfounded praise. Do you mean escort personnel?
Well, don't they both guard you?
One of them is an automobile.
Ah, sure.
She nodded. For all her evident ability in math and science, it seemed Japanese was not her forte.
Well, either way, she didn't try to seduce me or anything.
Well, naturally.
Then again, she seemed a bit of the socially awkward type. I don't think she listens when people are talking. And as a result, my PC evolved about 2 generations.
She's actually gotten quite better. She used to be terrible to talk to, just starting and stopping whenever she felt like it. It was pretty rough for me.
If you want my opinion, I think there's a certain charm to her unapologeticness.
I'm not so sure I agree on that.
Have it your way.
Akane shrugged.
By the way, I also heard from her that you were in the ER program.
Ow. That blabbermouth had let the cat out of the bag. I told her to keep that quiet. Not that I wasn't fully aware that there's no point trying to keep that girl quiet.
You should have told me. We could have had quite a chat. I feel as if we've wasted 2 days. I don't suppose you were holding back by any chance. Please don't get me wrong. I'm not such a big deal.
No, it's not like that. I guess it was just hard to bring up. And also, even though I was in the program, I quit midway. The program is a 10-year curriculum. I dropped out my 6th year this last January. From there, I returned to Japan and reunited with Kunagisa. Luckily, I was already qualified as a high school graduate after my 2nd year in the program, so I was able to transfer directly to Kyoto's Rokumaiken University.
It's still quite admirable,
Akane said.
Regardless of what a strain it became for you.
That's a strain.
Regardless of what a strain it became for you, the ER program's entrance exam is a great obstacle to have overcome. You should have a little more pride about your accomplishments.
The ER program's entrance exam was unusually difficult. Moreover, the application guidebook said, "There are no perks. This does not guarantee your future. No one will come to rescue you. We offer only an environment in which you may sate your intellectual curiosity." Still, elite candidates from all around the world gathered to take the test. So it was true, merely passing the test was something to boast about. But I hadn't completed the curriculum. There's no point when I dropped out midway. Results are everything in this world.
Everything in this world is a result, I happen to believe. Or are you one of those a genius is a genius is a genius people?
She asked in a somewhat sarcastic tone.
A genius is not a rose. In Japan, you often see people who take pride simply in the effort they give, don't you? I've endured great hardships regardless of the results, they say. They say there's merit in effort alone. I think that's a valid outlook. Having worked hard is a fine result in and of itself. What I have a problem with is scum who spout absurdities like, "I could have done that if I wanted," or "I couldn't do it because I just wasn't trying," or "I said I can do it, but that doesn't mean I will." That's all ridiculous. There really are all sorts of people in this world, huh?
Me, I don't do because I couldn't.
It seems you're quite the humbling person.
You probably mean humble.
Bingo.
The right part of her lip curled up in a half-smile, and she produced a pack of cigarettes from her pocket. In a graceful, fluid motion, she put one in her mouth and lit it. Wow, you smoke? I'm surprised.
Are you the type who doesn't like women who smoke?
Well, no, not women particularly. Smoking is bad for your health, you know.
Health is bad for your smoking, you know.
She retorted, slowly exhaling smoke. There's that seven fool's wit, I thought, but she smirked with embarrassment.
Mere sophistry. Don't mind me. It'd be awful if you ended up thinking poorly of me,
she said.
Shall we change the subject? I was actually in Japan all the way through high school.
Really? I was a little surprised, but if you thought about it, it was really no mystery. Which high school?
Just your average prefectural school. It isn't particularly well known. I was in the girls' karate club back then. It was fun enough. I didn't like it at all at the time, but in retrospect I must have had fun. Gee, that takes me back. It's already been more than 10 years. The skirts back then were this long. I didn't have the best grades, but I was good in math and English. That's why I ended up at an overseas university. My family was very against it, but I defied them. After all, don't they say if you love someone, set them ablaze?
No.
Anyway, it was like that, so in the end I cut myself off from my family and crossed over to America on my own. It was a hell of a big move for someone like me back then.
And thus, she ended up in the Seven Fools. She was a unique sort of Cinderella. So, you do like math? I had a feeling, I said.
Well, you know, I don't dislike it. In high school, I liked how there was always one concrete answer, no vague components, so math was all I did. I liked clear-cut things. But after college, at the ER3 system, I came to realize that wasn't necessarily the case. It's just like shogi or chess. You just have to get a checkmate, but there are an infinite number of ways to get there. I felt as if I had been swindled or something.
Like when a lover shows an unfamiliar side of himself to you?
A romantic idea, but not exactly,
Akane answered, laughing.
But I was also a little touched, you know. In my high school days, I always figured math wouldn't be of any use once I got into the real world. But in fact, there really are cases where you have to use calculus and cubic equations and such. You use factorials in everyday life. I was definitely touched by that fact.
I understand. I nodded. I really did. She smiled in a satisfied way.
Are you a math person too? On average, men are much more likely to be mathematically inclined than women, supposedly because of the way their brains work.
Is that so?
Well, based on statistical data.
Sounds like sexist data to me. Besides, statistical evidence is pretty unreliable. If you roll a die 100 times and it lands on 6 every time, that doesn't necessarily mean it'll be a 6 the next time too. I told her this, but she protested.
If it lands on 6 100 times in a row, it's a die that only lands on 6. It's too significant a difference to be written off as a coincidence or leaning odds. Male-female statistics are kind of like that too. So you're a feminist? Or are you just being polite around me? Well, unfortunately, I'm not a feminist. Listening to talk about expanding women's rights and women's liberation makes me sick to my stomach. I mean, right? They're obviously spouting nonsense. Sure, it's a man's world, but it's not gender equality we need, it's equal opportunity to apply our abilities. Men and women are so different that you can practically call them genetically separate creatures. So, Akane Sonoyama believes they have separate roles. Of course, that rests on the major assumption that your role and what you want to do are separate, and the minor assumption that if you have to choose between the two, what you want to do should come first. And maybe a prior medium-sized assumption that you can do what you want to do. To me, it all sounds like a convenient excuse for when you can't do anything.
There's also the factor of environment.
Environment, huh? But was there ever an age when women were forbidden from writing or from sculpting? Regarding recent trends, I've become more inclined to sympathize with men. I feel as if they're closer to my own point of view. But also, until the modern day, the workplace was always exclusively man's domain, right? So it's no wonder they got angry when women wanted to butt in.
It's just righting a wrong. Such are the pangs of birth, I said, wondering why I was having to take the feminist stance. She nodded.
Maybe you're right. I don't really know. But I can understand why women get angry at men, too. If all they're doing is carrying out their roles, then there's no call for them to put on airs. The anger is called for, just so long as they don't try to mix me up into anything. I guess what I truly want is for feminists to just do it away from me. Whatever the case may be, women are inherently a boring breed. Just like you men. Come to think of it, there are more men than women at ER3, too. Within the 7 fools, 5 are men.
Increasing returns.
Oh?
She seemed taken aback.
I'm afraid I don't know that term in Japanese. What is it, some kind of dieting thing?
It means beta loss to VHS.
Ah, you mean the bias that occurs in economics. That's right. To return a once male-biased world to equilibrium, you'd have to go through quite a bit of hardship. Really, there wouldn't be any problems if men and women weren't always acting jealous of each other. But nobody gets it, do they? Originally, discriminating just means knowing the difference.
Akane, coming from you, this all sounds convincing. I guess you must be going through quite a bit of hardship yourself.
Never,
she said flatly.
I just make a little effort.
It was a loaded statement. Suddenly, I recalled something I had wanted to ask someone ever since I learned of the Seven Fools' existence at ER3. Say, who's the number one smartest person in the entire ER3 system? In other words, who was the smartest person in the world? Akane answered with little deliberation.
Number 2 is Fraulein Love.
And number 1?
Come on, kid. You expect me to say it myself?
Ow.
Kidding. To answer your question seriously, the person I respect the most, or in other words, the person I place above myself and all others, is probably Assistant Professor Hewlett. He is certainly supreme.
Almost unspeakably accomplished, he was the single greatest mind of the last century, and probably this one as well. The first and probably last man to finish mastering every subject when he was still in his single digits. Granted criminal immunity on the level of the president, his intellect was safeguarded with his nation's whole might. If Akane was a god from where I stood, Assistant Professor Hewlett was the very fabric of the universe.
If he had been a woman, history would have changed course,
Akane said, looking off into the distance. It was a look of adulation.
Sorry for the wait.
With expert timing, Hikari appeared, pushing a cart. On top of it sat my breakfast. With experienced hands, she placed it in front of me, followed by a knife and a fork on either side.
Please take your time,
she said, with a bow and a radiant smile, and then went off somewhere once more. It seemed like she had lots of work to do. 9 pieces of deep-fried risotto balls and lettuce, fish soup, salad, and a sandwich made with Italian bread, plus coffee.
That sashirono is hot stuff, huh?
Akane muttered, eyeing my meal. Yayoi Sashirono. She ran the mansion's kitchen, but she wasn't an employee. Indeed, she was one of the geniuses who had been invited to the island. Having already been here for over a year, at this point, she was the longest-running guest. There was no doubt that many of the elite visitors to this island had come in hopes of trying her cuisine. Officially, her specialty was Western cuisine, but she could just as skillfully do any other type, whether it be Chinese, Japanese, or what have you. She was a cooking master with whom no one in the culinary world wasn't familiar, or so went the tales about her. Personally, I was even more ignorant about cooking as I was about art and academics, so I had sadly not even heard of Yayoi until visiting the island. But having the privilege to try her dishes 3 times a day, plus between meal snacks, even I came to know of her extraordinary culinary prowess. The typical image that accompanied a first name like Yayoi is either that of a stuck-up know-it-all or a short, spunky girl. But this Yayoi fit neither description, instead turning out to be a dignified, fresh breeze of a woman with short hair. With a polite manner about her, she was the unarrogant type, despite being called a genius. She was probably the most down-to-earth person on the whole island besides me. Likewise, she was the second most amicable person. Incidentally, Hikari was the first. There I go spouting nonsense. Word had it that Yayoi possessed some power that allowed her to make any food better than any other cook. But just what was it? I was curious to know, but had yet to inquire. She spent most of the day in the kitchen. Is that what you call a shut-in? So opportunities to speak with her were rare. I noticed that Akane was hungrily eyeing my risotto balls. After a moment of refusing to speak up, she transferred her gaze to me. Something about her eyes was slightly different from before, like those of a carnivore hunting prey.
Have you ever heard that people originally didn't acknowledge any numbers past 7?
I have, as a matter of fact. Apparently, all numbers past 7 were simply thought of as a lot. I had also heard in my program training that this was the fundamental reason why the fools were limited to 7 people.
Yeah. So just looking at things objectively, if your 9 risotto balls turned into 8, I don't think it would be such a great loss.
And?
You're dim, aren't you? How do you ever get along with Kunigisa?
It's not like that between us.
Don't change the subject. You'd have one of the 7 fools bow her head, is that it? Fine. Sashirono's risotto balls are delicious, so give me one. You happy?
I slid my plate to her without saying anything. Akane began to gleefully pop down the risotto balls one after another. Before you knew it, they were all gone. Apparently by one, she meant 1 plate. Well, I was never one to eat a whole lot in the morning anyway. I was supposed to eat for Kunigisa too, but it was her fault for leaving it to me. Switching channels, I made my way to the sandwich and salad. Not to be too generic, it was really good. If you said this was the only kind of food that was served at this island, and all of it free no less, no genius would decline. Surprisingly, even Akane was evidently in that boat.
Now then, to get back to the subject you're so slyly avoiding,
she said, awfully unjustly, wiping her mouth with a napkin.
If it's not like that between you two, just what is your relationship? If you were just friends, you wouldn't have come to this island together. You have school to worry about.
Indeed. By coming to this island, I had missed every day of class since the college entrance exam. Incidentally, I also missed the entrance ceremony. In other words, well, yeah. I met her before I was in the program, so roughly 5 years ago.
And when you got back, she turned out to be a cyber terrorist, huh? That's a sordid little tale.
Indeed. I saw it coming even when we were 13 years old. Nevertheless, reuniting with her after my 5 years of study abroad, I was honestly surprised at how little changed from the old days. Anyone would be surprised if a girl stayed in her early teens. Of course, that was just how things seemed. In reality, she had become much more, if not grown up, human in terms of personality. Our relationship. Asked flat out, it was a tough question to answer. Kunagisa needed me. That much I knew. However, it didn't have to be me. It would be extremely difficult to explain those circumstances. To do so, I'd have to explain a lot about Kunagisa herself, and I didn't especially want to do that. Akane nodded.
I haven't talked with Kunagisa all that much, but it seems to me she has too many shortcomings to go through everyday life. I guess I shouldn't say shortcomings. It's not like she's defective, but her focus is just so skewed. It reminds me of my friend whose kid is an idiot savant.
Savant. In French, it means a person with wisdom. I was aware that Kunagisa, too, used to be described precisely in those terms. I was all too aware of it.
So she probably really does need a caretaker, a friend like you. There's no doubt about that, but I mean, how does that make you feel?
I didn't have an answer.
It seems like your relationship is almost codependent.
Akane continued. Codependent? She tilted her head.
Haven't you heard the word? It's an addiction that affects human relationships. Like, for example, let's say there's a recovering alcoholic who has a caretaker by his side. He needs that caretaker, and the caretaker devotedly looks after him. But when that devotion goes to extremes, it's a sign of codependency. They get drunk on serving. You even see mild cases of it in romantic couples. Needless to say, it's not a good thing. You end up putting each other to waste. I'm not going to say you two are like that, but you might want to take care.
Sure.
Few things are as meaningless as prolonging a failed relationship. But still, I'm full of nothing but awe for Kunagisa's talents. Even at ER3, we're using software that she created. They created, rather. But certainly I never imagined I would meet her in a place like this.
Why are you on this island anyway? It wasn't like the Seven Fools had the emptiest schedules in the world.
No real reason,
she said, after a few moments' silence. It was a strangely bland response, and I had to wonder.
But more important, even if you're not the best player, you at least know the rules to shogi and chess, right? Why don't we have a game while we reminisce a little more about ER3?
A shogi challenge with one of the Seven Fools. Sounded interesting. Not blind, though. My memory is famously bad. Not the greatest reputation to have, if I do say so myself. If we can change locations, I'm in.
I've got a board in my room. It was the first thing I bought when I got back to Japan. I've actually got some work to do this morning. How's this afternoon?
Sounds good. Wait, I can't. I've already got something.
Oh? Meeting up with Kunagisa or something? Well, if that's the case, what can you do?
No, with Kanami. Akane's expression grew exceedingly stern. Damn it, I'd forgotten. When I had first arrived on this island, Hikari had been kind enough to let me know that Akane and Kaname were on catastrophically bad terms. But because of my famously bad memory, I had forgotten.
We're pals, so I'll give you a bit of advice. You shouldn't hang around with someone with such a vulgar occupation. Lowering oneself like that is stupid, you know?
Akane, you really hate Kaname, don't you?
No. There's no real reason for me to embrace any feelings of like or dislike toward that woman. But artists truly are a despicable race. Seriously.
She banged her hand on the table.
There's nothing I hate more than painters. They're the most inferior race in existence. Compared to them, petty thieves and serial rapists look like Jesus. All they do is dab a little bit of paint on something with a little brush, and they think they're so damn great. A little red, a little blue, and that counts as a day of work? Ha! Anybody can do it.
It was as if she had turned into another person. It was such an abrupt transformation, it almost made you wonder if a painter had once stolen her research materials or something.
Sorry,
she said, returning to her normal self upon noticing my stunned expression.
I guess I got carried away. Not that I'm going to take any of that back. But I know it's no fun listening to someone gripe about someone else. I think I'm going to go cool off.
Her words racing, she helped herself to the rest of my coffee and then made for the door as if she were beating a hasty retreat. It seemed like she was regretting losing her head like that, even if she wasn't going to take it back. Phew. I let out a sigh once I was alone. Man, I had been nervous. I'm not that used to holding conversations with people in the first place, much less Akane Sonayama of the ER37 Fools. No sweat, right? Well, aside from that blunder at the very end, we were actually able to hold a much more natural conversation than I would have ever imagined. So I guess I should have been happy. And maybe, sometime in the next 4 days, I would get to have that game of shogi with her. I'd ask her to play without her rooks, bishops, and generals. I let out another sigh, but there was no time to snooze. Having finished breakfast, I decided to pay another visit to Kunikisa's room. But not a second later, Maki appeared in mid-yawn, fully dressed in outdoor gear, which she complimented with a very high ponytail. She looked very much like she had come to this island on vacation. She hummed cheerfully as she strolled over and took a seat by me.
Good morning.
Hello.
Tut. You gotta say good morning when you greet someone in the morning. Wait. I guess I'm not such an early bird, am I? You've been up since 6. Wow! As for me, I have superordinarily low blood pressure, so I can't be like you,
she said with another big yawn. I gave the usual nod and yup combo. There was no point in asking how she knew when I woke up. I was once again nervous, this time in an entirely different way than I was with Akane. Maki Himina. Of course, she wasn't just here to go surfing. There was a solid reason for her being on this island. Maki's occupation was fortune-telling. Just as Kaname was a painting genius and Akane was an academic genius, Maki was known as a genius in the world of fortune-telling. Now that's a real talent, huh? That aside, I felt really awkward with Maki. We had had a bad first impression of each other. You're a fortune teller? I've never met one of those before. So, how does my fortune look? It's not like I actually cared all that much about my fortune. I just figured that since she was a fortune teller, it was the socially appropriate thing to say. Anyone would be thrilled to have the conversation turn to his or her field of expertise. As Churchill once said, I want to talk about what I know, but people only ask me about what I don't. I didn't want to be one of those people. That's just an excuse, though. In response, Maki grinned and said,
Well, give me your year, month, and date of birth, your blood type, and the name of your favorite movie actor.
I answered, wondering what possible connection my favorite actor could have to my fortune, birthday, and blood type aside. In fact, I had forgotten my blood type, and I didn't really know a lot of movie actors. For that matter, so 2 of my answers were bullshit. After hearing me out with her eyes shut, Maki said,
Okay, I see. Then take this.
She produced a slip of paper from her pocket and handed it to me, and with that, she left. Assuming this was like a paper fortune, I opened it and took a look. My date of birth, along with the blood type and actor I had just given, were inscribed on it in a typewritten font. It's gotta be some sort of trick. Later, I checked with Kunigisa about it, saying, I figured it's that worn-out magic trick where you hide slips of paper with random numbers all over yourself. Kunigisa shook her head.
No way. That might work for playing cards, but for something like this, there'd be too many. Plus, she couldn't have looked you up beforehand. It's not like she could have guessed you would lie about your blood type and favorite actor.
And then, Kunigisa gave me the Maki Himina lecture. It seemed that although uneducated folks like myself hadn't heard of her, Maki was actually a known name in the fortune-telling world. She didn't do those soothing horoscope cold readings like you see in magazines, but rather used her skill to advise bigwig politicians and corporate clients mainly, like some guru who nonchalantly stayed out of the limelight. Maki Himina, genius fortune teller.
Also known as a medium,
Kunigisa said meaningfully. Her catchphrase was, a power who knows the past, the future, human beings, the world, and all inside it. A power? I asked.
She has a superpower. Extrasensory perception,
Kunigisa said aloofly, using the English words. Huh.
ESP. Superpowers are divided into 2 categories of ESP and PK. What Maki's got is ESP. Retrocognition, precognition, and telepathy. I think it was. Retrocognition means she can see the past. Precognition means she knows the future. Telepathy means she can read your psyche.
Wait a second. I don't follow. Wind down your RPM. Tomo, she's a fortune teller, right?
Occupationally, yes. Using her special abilities. That's all. Being able to run fast isn't an occupation, right? But being an athlete is. Being good with your hands isn't an occupation, right? But being a technician is. Special abilities are abilities, and fortune telling is an act, but fortune teller is an occupation.
I nodded. So, Maki...
Yep. She read your thoughts in advance, including the fact that you'd ask her.
Kunagisa said with a bright smile. Superpower, I muttered softly so as to not be heard by Maki, now sitting next to me in the dining room. I recalled my conversation with Kunagisa, which had been somewhat convincing to be sure. But seeing this sleepy-eyed, spacey woman, it was really hard to think of her in such a way. She was just a weird sister with low blood pressure who was feeling drowsy.
You seem to have a problem with my being a fortune teller,
she said, suddenly shifting her glance towards me. For some reason, she seemed to be picking on me a little since our first encounter.
Perhaps you'd like me to go walking around with a black hood and crystal ball? Should I speak to you in vague, cryptic terms about your impending doom? You just take everything at face value, don't you?
I don't think that's the case.
Yeah, I'll bet. I know all about it,
she replied, shaking her head.
Well, whatever. You don't matter anyway.
I don't matter?
Yup. You're the Japanese representative of things that don't matter.
In other words, the most unimportant guy in Japan. It was a terrible thing to hear.
But I'll give you one piece of advice out of the kindness of my heart. Your impression of me is quite out of line. And that's not all. The ideas you hold about the residents of this island are all out of line. And that includes Kunagisa. More important, it looks like you intentionally adjust all your beliefs when you're talking to other people. That's surely a very comfortable way to live, but I wouldn't call it a wise one. It'll end up hurting you, big time.
She rattled off at me before letting out another cat-like yawn. For the last 2 days, I'd gotten the same earful of gripes every time we met, and I couldn't say she was all that far off the mark either. Her remarks were so accurate, I wonder if she really was using telepathy. I'll be honest, I found her really creepy.
Oh, I'm sorry for being creepy.
Muttering those words, she walked off in the direction of the kitchen, presumably to get her breakfast.